Longtime high school teachers of Reddit. How have students changed over the years? 18 years of teaching. The kids aren't different. There are smart ones, and lazy ones, and smart lazy ones. There are those who genuinely care, and those who see you as an obstacle to the grade they want, because you are going to make them work. Kids are people, and people can be messy. It's why I love this job. My brother and I are 17 years apart. When I went to school, if you were gay, your life was absolute hell. This was the late 90s. We had one guy that never came out, but it was pretty obvious to everyone. I never participated in the bullying, but I never stood up for the guy either. I was 5 feet 9 inches 115 pounds, pretty small myself. I recently went back home to visit my family and my brother had some friends over to study. 2 of his friends were gay. My brother is CPT of the wrestling, lacrosse, and QB of the football team. Super popular kid. I asked him privately if anyone gave him grief for having gay friends. His response was, why would they? His total look bewilderment made me really proud of him and his generation. Their music sucks, but their heart is in the right place. BTW, this was in Central Ohio. My grandpa has been teaching high school in a nice suburban town since the 70s. He told me a lot of great stories about his time teaching and about all of the students that he has taught. He often misses how things were before 9/11 and how the school atmosphere was more laid back and open in the decades before the 21st century. He is always shocked when he hears stories in the news about how students get suspended for bringing in scissors or pointing their finger at another student like it's a gun. For him, disciplining students for such things in decades past would have been unthinkable and totally ridiculous. The way that students behave has changed a lot as far as he's concerned, but some things always stay the same, such as the cliques that he has gotten used to seeing, in addition to the high school rituals and events like prom and football games under the lights on a Friday night. He taught in public school all these years despite going to Catholic school growing up. The kids in public school had way more leeway as far as mischief making and behavior were concerned, whereas the priests and nuns in Catholic high schools could be really harsh on students if they stepped out of line even one time. The style of clothing and the trends that he has seen over the years have been interesting for him to observe. He remembers girls with bell bottoms and the guys with their hair long like the rock stars that they idolized in the 70s. He used to joke about how big girls' hair could be in the 80s when some of his students were after the glam rock vixen look that they were used to seeing on MTV, and how you could smell the hairspray on them if you walked past them in the hallways. In the 80s and early 90s, he used to boot guys out of the bathroom down the hall from his room every week for smoking in there, and he has said how these kids would have been suspended really fast in today's world, whereas he used to just take their cigarettes from them without telling any administrators about it. He felt like he had more control over his students than he does today, in the sense that he never had to deal with crazy parents calling him about their kids' bad grades in decades past, but he has gotten way too many calls like this over the last 10 years or so. He finds it funny how boys over the years have always been concerned about their cars and how important a hot set of wheels are to them. He has always had students that drove some really nice cars to school, and, being a car enthusiast himself, he always loved talking to the guys about the cars that they drove, and about the work that they were doing on their rides and whatnot. One of the better pranks that I can recall him telling me about was the year when a group of seniors managed to get a cow into the library that proceeded to shit all over the place before animal control came to the school by the time that school started in the morning in order to get the cow out of there. I thought that this story was bullshit, but he assured me that that's how it went down, and that the only thing that smelled like bullshit was the library, not his story. He would never admit it to principals or administrators, but he has told me that he has always gotten a good laugh out of the senior pranks that were pulled each year, and that they have been one of his favorite annual events. He always finds his senior classes to be amusing, although somewhat obnoxious. Seniors never seem to change, in that they always think that they're the kings and queens of the school, and that they can push around underclassmen and screw with them for laughs. He had some good relationships with the more popular male and female students that were members of the football and cheerleading teams, but he never liked how they would haze the incoming freshmen mercilessly the summer before school started up. Whenever he would talk to me about his teaching career, he was never able to say if high school and his students have changed more over the years, or if they have stayed the same more than they have changed. He definitely has enjoyed teaching his entire life, and has had great experiences with many of his students who seem to keep coming back to him with each year, except with different faces. He'll always get a joker, a genius type, a troublemaker that needs guidance, a future PTA mom, a prom queen, etc. But he always enjoys having them around him despite all of their potential imperfections, and how some of them have managed to get under his skin at times. The one thing that I will always remember about his teaching stories is how much he loves the fact that despite him growing older as each decade passes, high school girls stay the same age. Former USAF staff sergeant. We would get a lot of kids fresh from high school. You could tell a huge difference between those before and after the implementation of the No Child Left Behind Act. Critical thinking skills were almost non-existent with quite a few. When I said out loud the Latin name for humans, one responded quite offended, "I ain't no damn monkey." There was also quite a lack in self-responsibility. The phrases "I don't know," "it's not my fault," or "I forgot" were said a lot, as if they were acceptable. I wrote a lot of paperwork. Couple clarifications. Critical thinking skills does not refer to their intelligence level. It's their ability to problem solve and even just connect the dots in certain situations. Give them multiple choice, and they are good to go. Have them explain why, and they give you the deer in headlights stare. Also, not all do this. Just a lot more than I usually see among young adults. For the "I don't know," "it's not my fault," and "I forgot," these are dismissive phrases, and that is exactly what they are doing. They are not seeking out help when they don't know, they just shrug their shoulders. Same thing for the "I forgot," and usually these two are tied in with "it's not my fault." It's tough relating the material to things they may have going in their life. My Chappelle, Family Guy, and South Park references get stale. Teens are teens. I don't think the human condition changes too much decade to decade. I teach in a very racially mixed area. Racism is a very foreign concept to them. I had a teacher that taught 40 years. I had him in 2011 when I graduated. He also retired that year. He taught sociology. Actually, it was interesting hearing him answer when someone asked him that. Basically, he said that over time kids never changed. Sure, the kids wore different clothes, maybe different slang, had different technology, etc. But overall we were the same as the other generations. It's just a different world. In my limited free time, I've been a private tutor for high school students for the past 8 years or so. Helps to put extra beer money in my pockets, and with a lot of experience, I can charge ridiculous prices. Anyway, the two things that I've noticed are, students have many more easily accessible distractions nowadays. I'm not sure if they are more easily distracted or have more opportunities to be distracted, but students typically take a lot longer to get things done because they are taking many 20-second breaks every few minutes. They spend longer working and might get less out of their homework because of how long it took. They may get to bed later and be more tired the next day, starting a vicious cycle. Students seem to have a much harder time seeking out information they need on their own. The proportion of kids who check their textbooks or willingly use the table of contents/index has gotten much smaller. Additionally, for a generation that has grown up with internet access, they are much less willing to search online for answers. A lot of my kids will Google the exact question they are asked in its entirety, and when the answer is not in the first 5 search results, or there is no Yahoo Answers page about it, they decide no one has ever been asked that question before, and they give up. On the whole, I find tutoring much more difficult. Kids used to ask me, "I don't understand why you do X instead of Y," or "Can you help me with insert specific topic?" I now find myself in the dialogue. Student, "I don't understand X." Me, "Okay, what about X is giving you trouble?" Student, "Everything." Me, "Well, let's work through a specific problem that was difficult for you." Me, "Have you started the homework?" Student, "No." I know this is directed at high schoolers, but I asked a prof this once. She had been teaching at UXT for about 20 years or so, and her reply surprised me. I thought she'd complain about lazier students or helicopter parenting, but her biggest observation was that 20 years ago her student body was much more diverse in socio-economic terms. Many of her students had parents who worked in factories and most seemed to have some kind of job. 20 years later, almost all of her students come from upper middle class families. She said the new homogeneity was very damaging in terms of classroom discussion. When everyone has the same background, they tend to reproduce the same worldviews and can't really see outside their social bubbles. She also speculated that this was also reflected in the new careerism of undergrads, who are not really interested in learning, but eager to check requirements off their list and go on to their job to make money. This surprised me, because we tend to think that poor kids are vocationally oriented, and it is only rich kids and this looks interesting kinds of classes. But it was more of a sobering look at the way higher education in California has become a crippling economic liability for all but the well-off. This famous professor has since left California for greener pastures at a fancy school on the East Coast. She said she felt demoralized by the collapse of public education in California. Well, longtime chemistry teacher here. Had one student a while back. Really bright kid. Had then potential for a 4.0 GPA. He never applied himself, though. He left with less than average grades, much to my dismay. Saw him a few years later, and my suspicions were right about him. He got involved with the wrong people. Ended up in a bad place. I talked to him for a while, and told him what he was doing was wrong. Ended up making and selling meth together. Quality kid. How some things never change. My grandma was a teacher in Pasadena in the 50s and 60s. She told me she collected 17 switchblades from students trying to stab each other on campus. I kind of keep that in my mental back pocket whenever someone brings up how dangerous schools are nowadays. I've been teaching middle school for 11 years. My 7th and 8th graders are some of the neediest children I have ever met. They totally lack self-confidence. I constantly have to tell them that they're doing a good job and that I love them. Yes, I have to say, I love you about 100 times a day. I think the neediness is caused by helicopter parents always being there, telling them what to do. And, I think they fact that they need to be told that they're loved by a teacher because they don't ever get it at home. I don't know if anyone will see this, but my husband teaches violent high schoolers in the South Bronx and has done so for 20 years. The two big differences he sees are far less imagination to get them to write about what if is pulling teeth. Most of them as kids didn't play pretend. They are very literal and can't seem to think outside the box. They are all obsessed with sneakers, clothes, and status symbols. Not just a few, almost all. They can talk about for hours. And it is not just what they wear, but little thugs who know what's in vogue, all of them. Coming in a bit late to the party. Boo, this is my 20th year teaching high school physics and other subjects in 2 different high schools. The first school I was at saw a radical demographic change in the 16 years I was there, from majority, 60%, white middle class to, in the final year before it closed, the incoming freshman class would have been 99% minority, mostly black, but with maybe 10% Spanish speaking, and almost that fraction. On free/reduced lunch. My current school is in its 3rd year of a federal/state school improvement grant because our test scores place us in the bottom 5%, I think, of schools in our state. About 20% of our juniors meet the state standards in reading and math. Over the years, I believe that kids aren't different, but they have access to different technologies. Social issues really haven't changed much. Poverty now sucks as bad as it did 20 years ago, and there really hasn't been much change in how that affects kids. The biggest change has been the transition from CD players that would hardly fit in a pocket, that only a few kids bothered with, to iPods and MP3 players, and now smartphones. The phones are an issue because they are so seductive. Why pay attention to a boring ass lecture on whatever when you could be watching YouTube, or playing a game, or texting your hottie? Locally, a more important change has been the radical drop in high school girls pregnant. Shortly after I started teaching, my county had the highest rate of teenage pregnancy in the United States, and my school was at the epicenter. In those years, I would often have more than one pregnant student in every class, and would rarely have more than 1 or 2 classes without any girls pregnant. Now, and for the last, 10 years, it's unusual for me to have more than 1 or 2 per year. The sex ed program changed a few years into my career to emphasize birth control and safe sex, and made it more annoying for parents to pull their kids from that class. One of my friends was a priest, and the local Catholic diocese's rep on the committee that came up with the new course, he wasn't a fan of the result. 30 plus years as a high school teacher here, special education, behavioral, ran a suspension and expulsion program for the last half of my career. Students are essentially the same as when I first started, minus the acid wash. However, the rise of social media/texting has amplified the consequences of bullying, which has existed since the dawn of playgrounds, in a very bad way, and this caused an increased awareness as to just how mean some kids can be. As well, there is a decrease in accountability among students. Perhaps because parents are less inclined these days to back the school, and as a result the teachers are more inclined to become the bad guys. Schools don't have any teeth anymore, which makes the real world come as a shock to many. Parents try to blame the teacher now. I'm smart enough that I email progress reports, despite a site continually updated called Skyward, upload my lesson plans, have time for extra help, give reviews, and grade habitually to the point where I have my students check their phones at the end of the period to see their grade. Still, some parents still try to get me. So I say, did they come to tutoring? No. Did they ask for extra help? No. I keep a log of all questions. Did they do the homework? No. I collect all homework. Did they do the review? No. I collect the review. At the end of the conversation, I win.